When Myra first saw the cracked window of the little café copyright on her street, she thought it was just another sign of things falling apart. The glass had spider-webbed overnight, a fine lattice that caught the early sunlight and turned the pouring rain into a constellation on the floor. She paused, hand on the café copyright's chipped brass handle, and for the first time in months she felt something like curiosity instead of the heavy fog she had been carrying around. 2 months earlier, Myra had left a job that had promised stability and delivered only grayness. The apartment she rented felt too small for the ideas that crowded her mind. Her evenings had turned into lists of shoals. She had always believed that life needed sweeping changes to be beautiful. A new city, a new love, a new title. What she learned that spring was different. Beauty, she discovered, arrived in small, stubborn increments. Inside the café copyright, the owner, an old man with soft eyes named Faraday, smiled without ceremony. "You look like someone who could use the lemon tarts," he said, as if they had been discussing pastries all morning. He gestured toward a sunlit table by the window. Myra sat, and the smell of coffee and cardamom wrapped around her like a familiar shawl. "What happened to the window?" she asked, needing to break the silence that had gathered thickly around her. "Oh, that?" Barrett's eyes twinkled. "A child threw a stone last week. He thought it was funny. He came back with his mother and apologized. We fixed it today. See, even broken things can get a new frame." Myra watched him carry a fresh pot of tea. It was small, ordinary, and exactly what she needed. A friendly voice, a hot cup, a world that didn't demand she be someone else. She began to come to the café copyright every morning. She brought a sketchbook. She brought her unanswered emails and turned them into lists of tiny, possible changes instead of mountain-sized obligations. One morning, while drawing the steam that rose like thin ghosts from her cup, she noticed a boy carving something into a wooden spoon at the next table. He had a nervous energy, fingers moving fast, eyes darting to see if anyone was watching. His spoon was clumsy at first, then gradually shaped into a bird. He glanced up. "My name's Baal," he said. "I'm learning to carve. My teacher says if I can make one small thing beautiful, maybe I can make more." Myra laughed, and then she stopped laughing because she recognized herself in his words. "My name's Myra. I used to think life had to be grand to be good, but now I'm learning about small changes." They began to meet there. Baal would show her the bird he'd carved. She would show him the lines in her sketchbook. They would talk about old songs, the way the neighborhood smelled after the first rain, the stubbornness of stray cats. These conversations were spare and honest, not the glossy exchange of acquaintances, but the kind where the real language is admitted one honest sentence at a time. Over time, their meetings braided into a steady thread through Myra's days. One afternoon, while they walked through the market, Myra saw an elderly woman struggling with a sack of potatoes. The woman's hands trembled, and a few potatoes tumbled out. Without thinking, Myra bent down and picked them up. The woman's laugh was small and grateful. "Thank you, child," she said in a voice that had lost some of its sharpness to kindness. People walk past as if they don't see. Myra had been walking past her whole life. On the way home that day she carried the weight of that small act like a secret treasure. It made room inside her for other tiny choices, calling her mother every Sunday, watering the lanky basil plant on her windowsill, leaving a note for her neighbor who always confused her days. Weeks stitched into months. The chipped café copyright window was replaced with glass that caught light without breaking it. Farad added a tiny shelf of second-hand books. Someone left a jar of buttons by the register. Baal carved a whole family of wooden birds and left them for the children who came in with sticky fingers. The neighborhood, in its modest way, learned to be gentler. Then the hospital siren split the twilight one evening. Myra watched from her window as the ambulance lights painted the street in pulsing colors. A few blocks away, a small apartment building had caught fire. People gathered, some crying, some shouting, some stunned. Myra grabbed a blanket and walked toward the commotion. At the scene, a family stood on the sidewalk, their faces white with shock. Flames had licked the stairwell, smoke still curled from a window. A woman clutched a toddler to her chest and hugged the little suitcase in her other hand. Myra handed the blanket over without thinking and found herself also offering warm water, a borrowed phone, And day when the mother's hands trembled with fear at the steady cadence of her voice. The mother's name was Nita. Over the following days Myra collected clothes, called the housing hotline with Nita, brought food when this family moved into a small shelter. Each act was small: a donated sweater, a phone number, a ride to school for the toddler, but together they formed a line of care that made the family stand straighter. Myra learned that help does not always resuscitate a life, it sometimes rearranges it so people can breathe. "Why are you helping me so much?" Nita asked one night, as they sat on donated chairs inside a community center. Her eyes were raw and honest. "Because someone helped me when my world felt like glass," Myra said. "And because I want a life that looks like this, full of people who pick up each other's potatoes." Nita smiled, and in that smile Myra saw a small revolution, of the kind that begins in ordinary rooms and doesn't need banners. As autumn edged the city, Myra began to teach a small weekly class at the café. Copyright, drawing with children after school. She taught them how to see shadows and the reverse shapes that make faces, how to make birds out of spare paper. The class grew slowly. Parents would drop kids off and linger, turning the café. Copyright into a gallery of crooked, magnificent efforts. Each little drawing was a proof. Making things beautiful required patience and a willingness to accept imperfect attempts. One evening, Lyle arrived with the problem. His father's workshop was closing, orders had dried up. He worried about his family, about the plates in the sink going unwashed, about the note from his brother that said, "We'll manage." It was the kind of worry that scrubs joy away inch by inch. Myra sat with him and listened. She did not have solutions big enough to fix all worries, but she offered her sketchbook and her idea, a small wooden market stall at the weekend bazaar, where he could sell his carvings. Lyle laughed until he cried. They built the stall together. They painted its sides with bright birds. They took turns sitting there, watching people stop, smile, and sometimes buy. The money was not a fortune, but it paid for screws and thread and a few extra meals. The greater thing was how Lyle's hands regained their old calm. He smiled more easily. His father called him stubborn as a son when he came home tired and flushed with pride. As the year rounded to winter, Myra found herself invited to speak at the small community gathering. She was nervous. She had no grand thesis, no polished speech. She simply told them the truth. Life is not transformed by a single earthquake, it is transformed by the steady accumulation of small, generous acts. She spoke about the cracked window at the café. Copyright and the boy who carved a bird, about Nita's blanket, about the parents who lingered in the café. Copyright to watch their children draw. She spoke about how beauty is not a finish line but an ongoing habit. Afterwards, an old woman with a cane came to her. "I used to paint on my balcony," she said. "I stopped because I thought nobody would care." "You made it matter again." Another person said they had been inspired to call their estranged sister. A teenager asked if Myra could teach them to draw the way she did with the children. A middle-aged man handed her a small envelope. Inside was enough for a week of groceries. "For the basil plant," he said, smiling, "so it grows taller than the windowsill again." Myra started to understand that make life beautifully was never meant to be a command hammered out in bold. It was a practice, a series of tiny resistances to apathy. It was noticing the child's wooden bird and letting the sight anchor you to hope. It was answering a call from your mother even when you were tired, fixing a neighbor's door latch, sharing tea with someone who needs a moment of warmth. Most of all, it was showing up imperfectly, repeatedly. There were hard days. There were nights when her inbox glared and bills whispered and she felt like retreating into the small safety of doing nothing. There were people who snorted at the idea of meaning emerging from such small efforts. But when she doubted, she would go to the café. Copyright, where the window now gleamed and reflected the street like a living map. She would sit and watch the ripple effect. Someone picking up a book, someone patching a jacket with a lucky stitch, a child pressing a painted bird to their chest. Those were the proofs. Years later, the neighborhood had changed, but not in the way Myra had once expected, and had not become a postcard-perfect place. It had simply become a place with fewer hurried steps and more people who stopped to hold doors or offer directions. The café. Copyright had a shelf of hand-bound notebooks. The market had a stall with wooden birds that, if you listened, seemed to chirp when the wind ran its fingers over them. Mira's family found a small apartment, and she began sewing again, selling little fabric flowers in the market. Bill's hands were steady enough now to teach other boys how to carve. On Mira's birthday, those who had been touched by small moments gathered at the Café Copyright. They brought a cake, a plant, a jar of buttons, and a tiny carved bird. Farrod raised his teacup. "To small things," he said warmly. "They will do most of the heavy lifting." Mira thought of all the expectations she had carried, that change would come like an exclamation point. Instead, she had discovered commas, pauses, and slow sentences. The beauty of life was not an arrival but a language learned in small lessons. It was practiced in the daily acts of attention and the willingness to be gentle without being grand. She picked up the tiny bird that Bill had left her years before, running her thumb along the smooth curve of its wing. Outside, beyond the Café Copyright window, a child threw a stone and laughed. Someone in the street called out a greeting. A stray cat curled itself into a sunspot. When Mira walked home that evening, the city did not look like a stage of perfect scenes. It looked like a quilt, stitched from thousands of loaves and small mercies and shared cups of tea. If someone asked Mira the secret how to make life beautiful, she would shrug and hand them a list, not of goals but of practices: notice, help, calm, mend, listen, planned, forgive, create, return. She would tell them to begin with something small and to keep going when the world looked indifferent. She would tell them that at first the changes feel too little to matter. Later, they do all at once and gently until life looks, quite quietly, more beautiful than before.